Here we are again. Again. Yeah, we already did that bit.
Yeah. So
moving on.
So Reddit was good this week.
Yeah, you didn't seem to get attacked too bad.
No, what was interesting is I feel like not too bad on the attacks. A lot of kind of the same type of response, which I think would be interesting to address, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about. Not much agreement, though, either.
Yeah.
Pretty good points, good questions.
Do you want to outline what you asked?
Sure. Yeah. So I was trying to do kind of a broad philosophical take on it. And so basically the question is crypto, meaning, cryptocurrencies, but also like crypto technology in general.
Yeah, cryptography.
Is that the ultimate way of exiting the authoritarian systems that we find ourselves in? Is that the way of, developing, crypto anarchy as some of the cypherpunks like to describe it?
Tim Mays.
Yeah, right. And the resounding answer, according to Reddit, is no.
Was it resounding? I saw a few people that said yes.
Yeah.
You're right.
I would say there was like 3 yeses and 75 nos.
You were also asking on like capitalism versus socialism.
Right. But that one, I was surprised. The Austrian economics one, I got a lot of pushback, which actually makes sense.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that.
And I think that there's an interesting division here because, we're talking about the cypherpunks and sort of describing them generally in sort of a libertarian way. But there does seem to be a sort of division between the Austrian economics subreddit and the anarcho-capitalist subreddit. I think it's 2 things. I think the Austrian economics subreddit, for some reason, has a lot of left-wing people in it, which is a little strange to me. But I notice that every time I post there. And then also there is an allegiance or like a philosophical tie to physical money, I think, in the Austrian room, which makes sense to me and kind of goes along with some of the things that we talked about. I don't remember if it was last episode or the episode before, about how I was saying that I think ultimately physical money solves a lot of the problems that are trying to be solved through cryptocurrencies. And I think that there are inherent problems when dealing with digital currency. And I understand crypto is trying to address that.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that's interesting. Yeah, and just to say real quick, I mean, so we're reading Julian Assange's book, Freedom and the Future of the Internet, a few passages from that, or a few chapters from that. But obviously this is all on the same topic of cryptocurrency, cryptography more generally, I would say. And yeah, what did the did you post in the anarcho-capitalist stuff?
It's the only one I'm not ratioed in.
That's funny. Well,
it's a lot of positive comments like, yep, that sounds right.
Yeah, like preaching to the choir here, brother.
Yeah, right. Upvotes, it's good. It feels that one. I look at that one, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, you found your people.
Yeah, the intellectual dark web doesn't like it. That one I'm pretty badly ratioed.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think I have a 0 upvote on that, and there's like 50 comments.
The Roganites. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, no, I peeked into the comments a little bit, and I saw, most people, most people were making the points I would say that we made last episode and the episode before, certainly about Bitcoin. And I mean, that's the other thing, as I noticed, a lot of people were implicitly talking about cryptocurrency as synonymous almost with Bitcoin, which obviously it's not, because they were saying, everything's public, and it's like, well, what about, we just talked about CryptoNote and Monero, right?
Right.
So
that was a common argument that I didn't really address with anybody. Was people?
I brought it up a few times with some people.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah. I went in there trolling a little.
Trawling. The public thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trolling, not trolling.
Yeah, so a lot of people were saying that it can never be secure because it's public, and so all the metadata is ultimately accessible. And
right, but that's the whole thing with Monero is that it's you make one-time keys that are public, but it's these keys aren't you need information to decrypt.
I mean, that's true of Bitcoin also.
I mean, it's less. Yes, but it's less. I mean, it isn't though. I mean, in Bitcoin, you are seeing the people's public keys. There's no encryption on that.
Right, but the key itself is encrypted data.
Sure.
What I'm saying is with Bitcoin, you can see a public key, but you don't see from that public key that person's social security number, as one person brought up, but you don't see that in there. You also don't see their wallet address necessarily.
Yeah. Although you can't. Oh, yes, you do. In Bitcoin, you see wallets. You can see whose wallet is who, and you can see that on many of the blockchains.
You can see whose wallet is who.
Well, like you can't say that this person is definitively this person, but you can see a wallet is doing transactions.
Right. What I'm saying is that information is not tied to easily identifiable characteristics,
yes,
even with Bitcoin.
The point is yes. So, yes, because, I mean, this is the whole thing with anonymous versus private, right? So,
yes.
But Monero is obviously adding many more layers of encryption in there. Is the point. You have to do much more decryption than just trying to, I don't know, just figure out if this public key is associated with this person. You can't even, because the public keys, I mean, the point is with Monero, if we were understanding the crypto note paper correctly, is that it's the idea that the public key is changing every time you do a transaction with Monero.
Right.
Because it's getting conglomerated with a bunch of other signatures and random data.
Right.
So that's the big difference versus Bitcoin. It's not getting changed every time.
Right.
So that's why it's so much harder to crack and as of yet hasn't been cracked. But this is where I will hedge the bet and say, and I was even talking to Mr. T about this, which he'll come back on eventually, but we talked about he wants to get an interface. We talked about that so that he'll have better quality. But yeah, he'll come back on and we'll probably talk about quantum stuff. But yeah, I mean, we were kind of agreeing that it's just an arms race. So it's just a matter of things will probably inevitably get decrypted if it's static. But it's the idea of if you have a group of developers that's constantly updating the encryption, they will be able to, it's harder to decrypt than it is to encrypt. And this is a point that Assange makes in this book, actually.
Right.
So the arms race is in the favor of encryption in some sense.
There are also situations where what I wonder, this is a personal thought, is on the level of physical money, less encryption is needed. And so in situations where your Bitcoin is being housed like on a physical thing, like in a QR code that sits in a folder, the need for encryption is significantly less. And the encryption of the transaction is probably sufficient in most cases.
I guess. I mean, it's just most cases
because the key itself is an encryption, because the key comes out of an encryption algorithm.
Yes. No. I mean, I agree. Yes, there is. It's Bitcoin is not completely open or anything like that, and
it's not like when you send and receive Bitcoin. It's like a signal goes out that has like all of your personal information with it.
No, but again, it's the idea that you can track a person's transactions.
Well, you
more
could
easily
track
with Bitcoin.
Yeah, you could track a wallet's transactions, and you could try and figure out who that wallet belonged to.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you can see when they're doing the transactions and all that. Whereas with Monero, it's just you're seeing transactions are happening,
right.
but you can't necessarily trace it back to one person.
Right. And then somebody brought up a risk of that is ultimately that if the system is that opaque, if there are people sort of creating false coins, you wouldn't know.
Right. Yes. Right. Well, yeah, but
like the danger of a fully encrypted system is that it's also very difficult to detect fraud.
Which is a point I made on the last episode when we were talking about how you do need a way to communicate to run a currency. You either need I think a central controlling mint, or you need a network, but the network needs to be able to communicate so that you don't have double spending and stuff. So yeah,
or just use physical. You can't double spend $1.
Yeah. Well, unless you
can print fake dollars. You can counterfeit dollars.
Exactly.
But you can't double spend a physical piece of paper.
Yeah, true. So, if anybody's curious about that, and listen to the last 2 episodes. But yeah, I mean, this is still on the same topic though, but kind of again zooming a little bit out. So we got on this whole thing from the cryptocurrency standpoint, just because obviously that's what most people think about when they think about crypto. Yeah. But it came, I guess, a big point that we're trying to make with this series, I think, at least the point I'm trying to make, is that it's more general. It's addressing a more general issue, and this battle has been raging for really millennia, right? But certainly the last 30 years in earnest, as evidenced by the establishment of the cypherpunks.
Right.
And it's kind of exciting in that sense, right? And I wanted to make a correction before we get into the book. I spoke about, so the 3 founding members were Eric Hughes, Tim Mays, and John Gilmore, at least for the emailing, the email chain. But and I had said that one of the founders hosted an anonymous remailer, and it was John Gilmore. I apologize because I shouldn't have messed that up, because John Gilmore is still alive and is a very active activist for sort of this, basically, like encrypted landscape. He wants an encrypted world free from government interference, and very libertarian and whatnot. So apologies, my apologies, and yeah, shout out to John Gilmore. Yeah, wonder if he's related to David Gilmour. Probably not. But yeah, so okay, so yeah, we're talking about basically now still kind of talking about the cypherpunk. So Julian Assange is a cypherpunk, right? He was on this email list, which explains why he is so. I mean, I would say, the probably preeminent cypherpunk now, right? Even though people don't understand that that's his background. But he did write a book, right? And I guess it was also like a show or a TV show or something, which is kind of interesting and weird. It makes me a little bit, makes me a little bit like, okay, wait, is this also a psyop? Is everything a psyop?
Well, I mean, there are books that are conversations. That's not unusual.
No, it's the network aspect of it. Anytime there's like a professionally made television thing, especially in like 10 years ago. I mean, less so now. It's much more decentralized. But in 2012 or 11, whenever this was. I mean, basically, so the book is, like I already said, Freedom and the Future of the Internet by Julian Assange. It was published, I think, in 2012. So this was right as things were really heating up for WikiLeaks. They had already published the spy records, I think they were called, right? Which were the Chelsea Manning, right, had basically leaked a bunch of information to Julian Assange to publish on WikiLeaks, among other people, right? But I think Chelsea Manning was the main one that really got in trouble. Right. And, yeah, it's kind of a sad story, too. I mean, so I'm 32, so I remember all of this happening vaguely, but I wasn't paying attention to the news. We were in college, right, in 2012.
Right.
I wasn't really paying attention to the news that much, but of course I remember hearing all these names and stuff. But I didn't realize, Chelsea Manning's like, she would have been like 22 at the time that she did the leaking, which is very interesting. Yeah, you always see that.
Right.
Like there was also that 20-year-old that just got arrested for leaking like Pentagon stuff like 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know if you remember that. And I guess it makes sense because you're idealistic and also, maybe you don't see all the consequences as clearly. But I mean, this basically has, in many ways, I would say, ruined Chelsea Manning's life, which I feel bad. It's ruined Julian Assange's life as well. But Julian Assange was 40 at the time. Like he was already like he knew what he was getting himself into, if that makes sense.
Right.
Whereas it does feel like Chelsea Manning may have been a bit of a pawn in all this. Anyway, I'm not saying that anybody coerced her into doing this, right? But it's just interesting. So that happened, and that's what this is responding to. So they're being sued by the government. They had a bunch of like secret tribunals essentially, and the government was subpoenaing all sorts of internet companies for their information, as they detail in this, that like Google and Facebook and Twitter, and they were trying to shut down. WikiLeaks, I think, had its domain initially registered in America, so they were, of course, trying to shut that down. And I actually meant to read up more recently, but I didn't get the time before the episode started to see how WikiLeaks is still up, because it's still up. Like somebody is hosting it still. I imagine it's distributed, over the world. But yeah, so it's just interesting. So it's essentially a dialogue between Assange and these other people who are all in the cyber security, I guess you could say, space, and are cybersecurity experts. So the other people are Jacob Appelbaum, the founder of Noisebridge in San Francisco, a member of the Berlin Chaos Computer Club, and a developer. I'm just reading; these were the intro in the books, but I think it's good. And he's an advocate and researcher for the Tor project, which is an online anonymity system. Think Tor browser, right? And then Andy Muller-Magoon is a longtime member of Chaos Computer. Yeah, sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing everybody's name. Appelbaum I got, but Magoon, Chaos Computer Club in Germany, former board member and spokesman, one of the co-founders of EDRI, the European Digital Rights, which is an NGO on enforcement of human rights in the digital age. And then Jeremy Zimmerman, who's the co-founder and spokesperson for the citizen advocacy group La Quadrature du Net. Sorry, I should be able to say that, but it's French. I took 5 years of French, but it was public school, so all I can say is, can I go to the bathroom?
Nice.
And then so this La Quadrature du Net is the most prominent European organization defending anonymity rights online and promoting awareness of regulatory attacks on online freedom. And then, of course, Julian Assange. I think we all know him, but just as a reminder, so he's an editor-in-chief of the visionary behind WikiLeaks, and an original contributor to the cypherpunk mailing list. And so recently he was released. So I think at this point he was maybe just getting into the Ecuadorian, seeking basically refuge in the Ecuadorian
embassy.
Embassy, thank you. I was like, why? I was almost going to say assembly. And of course he's in London, right? But he's since been released. And, for the first kind of charge brought up against him was a rape charge that the Swedish authorities were bringing up against him. And then, they detail in this book that there were like assassination attempts on him. I think now they're talking plainly that, I guess, allegedly Pompeo wanted to have him killed. Allegedly, Antushka. I don't know. Maybe it's true. Who knows? I hope it's true. You're allowed to say that. Just because it would show the corruption, that's why. Not that I want him dead. And yeah, so we read some specific chapters: the militarization of cyberspace, the private. Sorry, I don't know if you recall them offhand.
They're kind of long titles. Yeah, I read the first 6 chapters.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
So notes on various attempts to persecute the WikiLeaks. We already kind of talked about that. Increased communication versus increased surveillance, militarization of cyberspace, fighting total surveillance with the laws of man, and private sector spying. So, so generally, I think the big take home for this is, they want encryption. They don't want government tyranny. They think we live in a tyrannical. A world that is basically we're all under martial law,
right,
with respect to our communications, and trying to wake people up to that fact, and also educate people about encryption and explaining how this can be combated and why it should be combated.
Yep. Yeah. I think in the introduction there's some important sort of philosophical groundwork that Julian Assange lays out. Yeah. So his introduction to this book he calls A Call to Cryptographic Arms.
But it's not a manifesto.
Yeah, right. It's a call to arms, which is more intense than a manifesto, perhaps. What's interesting is there's an expediency to his tone. You know, he's saying this is an important thing we need to do. And reading this book, I get the sense that it's a depressing book to read, because I think we've lost. So my answer ultimately to my Reddit question this week is crypto the way out? Is perhaps it was, but we didn't take it. Maybe. And so he starts off, he talks about how the internet is both a tool of, the greatest emancipation in history, and also a tool of, complete totalitarianism, surveillance state. It cuts in both directions. We've talked about that before. And the problem is that the totalitarian, the authoritarian state will do everything it can to leverage the internet and create an internet that is essentially a tool of surveillance, which makes sense. And that, we talk about this, not just you and I. It seems like everybody in the country talks about this. We all sort of know this implicitly, whether or not we would like to admit this to ourselves.
And why do we know this? Because of WikiLeaks.
That's not even why we know it. We knew it before WikiLeaks.
No, but I think that there was more plausible deniability certainly before the Snowden leak.
But I remember the Snowden leak when we were in college, and our friends, I won't even say who they were.
I know who you're talking about.
But we're mad because they said we already knew this. And it's and then what do we mean we already knew this? And we're just fine. It's just...
That's funny you remember that. I don't remember him saying that.
Wait, do you know who I'm talking? It was more than one person.
Course. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a whole group of people. I remember a specific conversation at the Rathskeller in Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah. Anyway, there's an important bit he talks about where he talks about the physical nature of the tools and devices we need even to create the internet. Because the internet is this interesting sort of abstracted space that we've created from the physicality of computers and circuits and things like that. So this is Julian Assange in his introduction. He writes, "The platonic nature of the internet, ideas and information flows, is debased by its physical origins. Its foundations are fiber optic cable lines stretching across ocean floors, satellites spinning above our heads, computer servers housed in buildings in cities from New York to Nairobi. Like the soldier who slew Archimedes with the sword, so too could an armed militia take control of the peak development of Western civilization, our platonic realm." And so I think that this is an important thing to think about that I feel like not the internet and computers are so abstracted, we don't think about the fact that ultimately they are still physical. There are physical devices creating this situation, and those physical devices themselves can be co-opted through force of governments. Governments can control mines, they can control power lines, they can control everything needed to make the internet. And so he goes on to say, the new world of the internet, abstracted from the old world of brute atoms, longed for independence. But states and their friends moved to control our new world by controlling its physical underpinnings. The state, like any army around an oil well or a customs agent extracting bribes at the border, would soon learn to leverage its control of physical space to gain control over our platonic realm. And there were people who brought this up on Reddit, and it kind of goes back to my physical money thing. It's another side of this piece of the problem, is that there's a battle happening in an abstracted space, but one of the teams fighting that battle has control of the physical side of it. So they have all the groundwork, essentially. Because at a certain level, it doesn't matter how many cool crypto programs you have made if your electricity is stripped from you.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. With the system as it's set up right now, I think you're absolutely right.
Right.
Yeah, because, I mean, it makes you remember, too, in a sort of double-sided way of it, and this is where, the statist in me comes out, mm-hmm. right, is these technologies were made hand-in-hand with the government in many of the cases, too. Like, mm-hmm. Bell Labs, so we're talking about telephones, which then became essentially the internet, because Bell mm-hmm. Labs, all Unix and all this stuff in association, obviously, with DARPA and the ARPA and stuff like that. It's always been this tight-knit connection between the smartest minds in our civilization and the powers that be mm-hmm. to innovate, to outcompete, obviously, our aggressors.
Right.
And yeah, because they control all the money to do things quickly. So they're always going to beat out, sort of the amateurs most of the time, not always. There's obviously cases of amateurs doing things. And so we can bring up Edison, but mm-hmm. Of course, I think even Edison everybody, especially anybody that's rich, has connections to the powers that be, and the powers that be is always the government,
Right.
So it's not surprising to me that the infrastructure is controlled by the government, because the government created the infrastructure. Hand in hand with Bell Labs, they put down the telephone lines, which then, got relayed with the fiber optic lines that we run the internet on, and the deep sea cables and all this wouldn't have been able to, I won't say wouldn't have been able to be done, but it was done
right.
hand in hand with government, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes this question of, we know that computers can communicate with each other, so is the real battle then is another aspect of the battle, I should say, on the side of hardware? Mm-hmm. Should we be thinking about a better way of communicating that is less controllable
right.
in the physical sense? Because your point about, government controlling the physical world, then you could make that point about physical money, right? That's still a physical thing. And if government is ultimately having control over our physical reality, money would fall into that. But I think what you're saying is that money has the capacity to not be controlled, because you can do two-way exchanges without a third mm-hmm. party. And so should we be thinking about hardware where you can do two-way exchanges over vast distances without a third party?
I would say that my answer to that last question is a definite yes. No question in my mind. Mm-hmm. Anything can be controlled, like any property can be forcibly taken from you. Mm-hmm. That's not something new to the internet. That's like,
as you found last week.
Right. Exactly.
Sorry.
No. I feel like that describing it that way is disrespectful to the people who have had things taken from them in very serious ways.
Yes.
I'm listening to a whole history thing on pogroms in the early 20th century, and it's just like
the Huguenots,
out of control, man.
It's always happened.
I think that the next point that he makes, addresses it for me. He doesn't address it in this way, but it addresses it for me in a way, because he says I like how he puts this. He says the universe believes in encryption. It is easier to encrypt information than to decrypt it. And if I go back to like libertarian first principles, in my mind, what cannot be taken from you without killing you are your thoughts and your speech. Not like, you can cut somebody's tongue, but somebody can communicate, and somebody can communicate in an encrypted way. Somebody can communicate in code. We all have this within, this is within our rights to do. And so things don't actually have to exist on, quote, the internet as we think about it. Like a cryptocurrency could actually be a coded way of speaking to each other.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
maybe.
Wait, why not?
Maybe. Well, I mean, it's like, I understand in theory it could be, but you have all these other things that make a currency, like double spending and all that, issues.
Well, but a currency can be a currency and double spent. It's a problem to be addressed. I'm not saying that this is a good
currency that works.
I'm not saying this is a currency that works. I'm saying that.
Oh well, then why are we talking about it?
Because I'm saying at its root,
I get it.
Encrypted communication is not regulatable.
Yes. Sorry, I was being silly when I was being flippant. I didn't mean it seriously.
Right. I mean, there's a reason that people are trying to build Monero and Bitcoin and all these complex systems, because, yes, there's a lot of problems when it comes to building a currency. I'm not saying that we should just have our currency be some kind of verbal code. I'm saying that at its baseline, that is possible.
Yes.
And so this is the battle, and this is where I like how Julian Assange is bringing it up about the universe believes in encryption. The idea that this is something afforded to us by nature by our very nature. And so that is how the battle can be won. And this is the other side of me, the optimistic side of me, is it can't be won because the government has all the marbles is just like simply not creative enough from my perspective. And that's where I'm excited by reading about something like the cypherpunk movement. Not that it's all wins all over the place, but it's people trying to use their creativity to battle the authoritarian system. Not that they always win.
No, and yes, I mean, yeah. And there are people winning. It's just we don't hear about them because they're winning.
Exactly.
That's kind of the funny thing about it. It's like there's plenty of people talking to each other, and we just have no idea because they're doing it so well, encrypted. So, but it's funny. So, not to get you on a whole rabbit hole, but as you were saying that, it's making me think about what you said last week, how it is a funny counterpoint to your main thesis of wanting everybody to speak their mind, and is almost getting at a point I was also making. I'm just repeating everything from last episode. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But the point I was making is that it almost feels like it is like nature is encrypted by definition. Like nobody's like wearing their opinions on their sleeves by default. It's like everybody's concealing what they're, even animals are. You have to like interpret an animal to understand it by, it's not always as clear. But then I think even when I said that, I was like, maybe I should think about that a little bit more. Because, I mean, obviously, there's the jokes about how you can always tell.
Yep. I think it depends on what mode you're interacting in. For me, I personally like interacting in a cooperative mode. I am not a highly competitive person.
God, communist.
Right. Yeah. So that's my preferred mode. However, the more I think about it and the more we do these readings, and I think about something that a friend of mine used to say that all of life is poker. And he's really into poker. And, you know, there's those guys. We know him. Everybody knows a guy who's really into poker. But I kind of get it in a way. Yeah. I mean, you could say poker, you could say chess, you could say whatever, but there is a competitive game that happens in life. And when you were saying just now that nature is encrypted, when there's, you know, a mountain lion and an elk, they are battling each other in a game, in a way. Mm-hmm. In a game with, you know, very unfortunate consequences for the elk or for the mountain lion, because the mountain lion might starve to death. I mean, it's no good for either of them.
Yeah. Might trip, fall off a cliff.
And neither of them can read the other one's thoughts. They're battling, right? So they're, quote, playing poker or something like that. And so I think within that mode, encryption is all they have. Mm-hmm. You know, encryption, we're now using the term very loosely, but they're going to try and make moves that the other one isn't expecting in order to win the game.
Right. And it's actually making me think, I don't know if you ever watched Bill Maher's podcast, but
which one?
Different from his show.
Oh.
What's it called?
The one where he sits on a chair and smokes
Club
cigarettes
Random.
Or something.
Yeah.
Cigars,
yeah.
not cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
not really.
I don't watch every episode, but there's definitely a few good ones. The one with Dwight Schrute is ridiculous. Dwight comes off really bad on that one, in my opinion. I mean, yeah. So, but anyway, it doesn't matter.
Dwight Schrute.
The actor.
From
The Office.
Yeah, that guy. Yeah.
I don't remember his name. I can't remember his name.
Okay. Well, it's okay if he comes off bad. Poor guy.
I would have remembered if it came off better. And I like him. I wanted to like him. I mean, and anyway, it happens. But anyway, so I bring that up because I think I think it was in that interview actually where Bill Maher was like, life is a game. Mm-hmm. Like I think that there's a lot of people that think that way.
Right.
And on days I think that way too, but I think on the whole I don't have that perspective. But look at Bill Maher when he says that, and I mean look at everything he's achieved.
Right.
Like he's definitely winning the game.
Yep.
From some perspectives, obviously. So yeah, I think looking at it like that makes sense because I think, especially a lot of competitive people think about it like that.
Yeah.
And it's it is interesting that you are so cooperative. I agree. I see that in you, and yet you have this anarchist streak. Whereas, like, I think
it's funny to call it a
more
streak.
Statist. I shouldn't call it a streak. I mean, I don't mean it as in like it's a passing thing. I mean it like
fad.
It's a component of you.
Right.
It's a large component though. It's not a streak. It's a
Anyway, but yeah. So you're a statist. Yes,
I'm a statist, but I think I'm also more competitive than you. Given just like you kind of have to be to
but
get
that's
into
what the state's doing.
My field.
But this is the thing: is whenever I see the state, I see a wildly, like quote Machiavellian, to use that term. But I see an organization playing very aggressive chess all the time.
I can see that perspective, but I guess I'm getting it.
And I'm saying I don't want to play, and that's maybe I'm lazy.
But I'm getting at it from the perspective that it's it's for a state to exist, you need people to cooperate. Whereas like the purest form of an anarchist in my head is the hunter-gatherer on the plain. I
mean, I would not agree with the statement that for a state to exist, you need people to cooperate. I would say for a state to exist, you need people to submit. People don't have to cooperate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can. And now we're just. Sorry, I meant to not get us into this rabbit hole because we should get onto the book. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about on the book.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Don't worry about what I said.
Yeah.
we can leave it with people cooperate.
Us. We could, but because then we could quibble about what cooperation is and whether you can't cooperate under submission, and who cares about that discussion right now?
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to hit one more thing in this intro, just after it, and it's my favorite part that I read this week. It's in line with the universe loves encryption. He says the universe believes in atomic bombs and nuclear reactors.
Yes.
Because he goes back. Perhaps nuclear weapons were. Wait, hang on. I have to go back one more sentence so this makes sense.
Wow.
Scientists in the Manhattan Project discovered that the universe permitted the construction of nuclear bombs. That's a great way of putting it. They discovered that the universe permitted it. Mm-hmm. This was not an obvious conclusion. Perhaps nuclear weapons were not within the laws of physics. However, the universe believes in atomic bombs and nuclear reactors. They are a phenomenon the universe blesses, like salt, sea, or stars. Similarly, the universe, our political universe, has that property that makes it possible for an individual or group of individuals to reliably, automatically, even without knowing, encipher something, so that all the resources and all the political will of the strongest superpower on Earth may not decipher it. That's quite a statement.
Yes.
And the paths of encipherment between people can mesh together to create regions free from the coercive force of the outer state, free from mass interception, free from state control. And I think this is the key. This is it, is like it's a belief. Do you believe that the encryptors have the power to outpace the decryptors? And he's stating it almost like it's axiomatically true.
Right.
And from my interactions on Reddit this week, I get the sense that a lot of people, maybe it's a pessimistic thought, maybe they like the state and they're just sort of like boosting their team. I don't know. But they seem to think that the encryptors will never be able to outplace the decryptors, and the decryptors will always win. That feels to me...
Right.
The axiom that the encryptors will always win kind of feels true in the same way that Marcuse, bringing it all the way back to him, talked about how progressive action is always justified and reactionary opposition is always unjustified.
Yes.
It's kind of feels similar to bring it all the way back to that, because the idea that the encryptor is the one doing the action and the decryptor is reacting to it. So it feels almost axiomatically true that the encryptor will always be at least one step ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense in my head. Do you agree with that?
I do. I just don't really know how to test it. It feels like a really exciting, sexy thing to be true, and I hope it's true, but...
well, and so just if anybody's curious, we talked about Marcuse at the 21.0 episodes.
Okay. Yeah.
If anybody wants to listen, I was trying to find that while you were saying that.
Nice.
Just because...
one-dimensional man and then repressive
One-dimensional
tolerance.
man, we read it. Yeah, right before Hoppe.
Yeah.
Those, I would say, are some of our more argumentative podcasts in that era.
I feel like the Marcuse ones were good. Maybe not.
The Marcuse ones were good, but we got very argumentative when it got to Hoppe.
Nice.
But that's not bad. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So I think I believe that, though, too. I mean, for the reasons we've already basically said, is that when I look at nature, it does seem to be encrypted. And so the default is not knowing, I suppose, or whatever. You know, it's like, yeah, the first action is obfuscation, and then, you know, the second action is trying to make sense of this.
Right.
Because that's essentially what we're doing with science. We're trying to decrypt nature.
Right. But so
you know,
God has obfuscated, and
yes, and you're right. We're being very loose with encryption, but I like it. I like being loose with words. It's fun.
It kind of feels right with respect to this conversation, and the idea of crypto because it's so broad, especially when we're talking about crypto technologies. We're really it could be anything.
And so yeah, I mean, and of course the justification as they talk about it, and as like Tim Mays discusses, is and this is in response to you saying you feel like the default of the Redditors' response is that decryption is the, I guess, base, like life is decrypted by default, so it's,
I guess,
or rather it's easier to decrypt, I guess would be the
I
opposite.
think that what they would argue is that the government has so much power
Right.
that there is no way for any individual or any groups of individuals to outpace the government's ability. Essentially,
Right.
it's like a CPU thing. The government can
Right.
overrun through its massive CPU power any individual or
Right.
group of individuals' CPU.
Right, which I think, which is basically what I meant when I said that decryption is easier for the government at least, and so I think some of the things to justify this belief that people have, the belief that decryption is easier, is not just the CPU power and all that stuff, because those are obviously, if you dig deep, those are, I think, where people start to get into technical reasons. But a more superficial reason, as they discussed in here, there's like I was trying to find it, if you have it easily, the four horsemen of, like, the totalitarian state. It's basically the four things that the government brings up for why they need to have the power to have backdoors in phones and stuff. Is, terrorism, CP, right, / trafficking, and then
Washing money,
and
the war on some drugs, which is an interesting new term. I found that exact term in a whole bunch of old cypherpunk websites.
The war on
some drugs.
Yeah, I mean, because it's true. We are okay with Adderall and all this other stuff.
Kind of. I mean, it is regulated.
Yeah,
Adderall more than alcohol, but yeah.
Right, but then, I mean, yes, exactly. But everything's regulated, so of course. But yeah, I mean, yes, it is interesting. And yeah, so that was another thing that I think that just to be aware of, that this is a common talking point. And I guess my response to that, your response to that, is it shouldn't matter. That's kind of what you said last week, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what I'm doing with it. I mean, you wouldn't do any of those things with it, but the point is that it's not your business. And my point is, if we had better local systems, this wouldn't be an issue. It's like because you would be able to keep tabs on your neighbor if you know them and are friends with them. But we're so dissociated from the people on our local scale that, yes, of course you can get away with all of these horrible things because we've become siloed so much because we are dependent on the government.
I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle as well. As the government becomes more regulatory, all of these problems get worse. And this is this weird government axiom, and a lot of people aren't with me on this, and you probably aren't totally with me on this, but everything the government does, it makes the exact problem worse that it is trying to solve. There's not a single problem the government ever tries to solve that it doesn't make worse.
Yeah, I don't think I'm as,
Yeah. Like, as it tries to make healthcare more affordable, it makes it more expensive. Like, it does the exact... As it tries to be tough on crime, it increases crime.
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah, the healthcare one is so evident to anybody that wants to really think about that, because it's like, I just remember watching, because I mean, I was still in college when the Obamacare stuff was going on, but my brother and sister were out of college, and just seeing them be forced to pay because they didn't have healthcare. It's like, how does this make any sense? Incentive? Okay, yeah. But anyway, talk for another time. So, okay, so there are a few points. Any more on that?
I mean, I could keep going on it. I think it's an important, like, philosophical bedrock point, but I think we should move on.
Yeah, so I think a big thing that I pulled out of this, I guess takeaways were, one, the fact that maybe this idea that okay, so they talked about the data being tracked on everybody, right?
Yeah.
But, and being collected also. So collected and then held. And at least 14 years ago, it was still difficult data was much more expensive even 14 years ago. Right. You had to have a decent amount of money to store everything that somebody did online. But it's only become cheaper and cheaper. And even 14 years ago, it was relatively cheap. And so that's the point, is that this is, I guess, working in counter to the encryption side of things, because it is making it easier for people to track us. It's like you couldn't conceivably store everybody's movement online in the 90s because you just you didn't have hard drives that big. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Does that make sense?
I see. Sure.
Sorry, that was a roundabout way of saying that. I should have just said it outright.
Right.
But now you can, because we have huge centers with just a gazillion amount of gigabytes, or a gazillion gigabytes.
Now, one thing I like to think about, and it's a thing that makes me feel better, is I am a little bit skeptical of the government and even large corporations' ability to do useful analytics on such large amounts of data.
I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be... Sorry.
No, that's it. I mean, I don't know the technology well enough to make that claim definitively, but the sense that I get is it is actually very difficult to deal with data amounts of that size.
It was, but this is and this is actually something I can finally talk about. This is actually in my expertise. We finally hit something I know about.
Nice.
But big data, because that's essentially what I'm doing. It was hard and still is difficult, but and maybe lags a little bit behind the memory problem. But I think AI and really Chat GPT and all of these sorts of large language models are changing that, because now you can just, if you have a sufficiently trained GPT, of course, you can submit large amounts of text to it to get it to parse things and identify important things. And it's only going to get better. Obviously, we're not, there yet, but
I think that there's probably a problem here of not being able to check how good it actually is, because we're not able to do it. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but searching through JSTOR, some database, and you're looking for a paper on some topic, and you try all these different keywords, and there's definitely a gazillion papers on this topic, but something about the way you're looking for it is not working. I remember this in college, looking, there's 1 million papers on Brahms' First Symphony, but it's impossible to find them.
Yeah, but I really think that it's...
And so ChatGPT would find them no problem.
Yes, exactly.
And how would we be able to check how much it's missing?
Well, you have somebody that reads all of them.
So you have a person go through the whole database and double check.
But the idea is that you do that on small problems, so that on the larger problems...
You can just assume it's doing it right.
But that's... Yeah, I mean, this is getting into P equals MP, so you're raising a good point. Is it easier to solve or faster to solve a problem than it is to check it,
I mean, if it's doing it well, it's definitely easier for it to do it. It's just, how do you know it's doing it well?
Yes, and you need ground truth. And so this is the other thing. If you ever do anything in machine learning or really any data science, is you always have to have ground truths to check your model against. So it just depends on what your question is. But in the case of the government that is analyzing a bunch of biometrics or whatever online activity of a person, I feel like those are easier Those are not that difficult of problems, I guess is how I see it. Even not being in the field, I feel like I can see how it would be easy to
I mean, computers are currently
extract
bad at dealing with biometrics.
Well, what do you mean by that?
I mean, like, if you have a beard and you didn't have a beard before, it doesn't recognize you anymore.
It's getting much better.
I know it's getting better, but it's currently bad. Like I've had problems.
No, it's not.
Okay, I have had problems logging in. Okay, I've had problems logging in to government apps and sites where this exact same problem. Like I had long hair, but it's using, according to it, a biometric AI system to recognize you.
Yeah, no, because I agree. Like 3 years ago, I would try to open my iPhone and I'd have a beard,
right,
and like glasses on, and it wouldn't recognize me. But now it does,
right.
So it's only getting better. Is kind of my point. I'm not saying any of these are at that scale now, but it is improving, and I think it's improving exponentially. So
it'll be able to recognize you before you can.
Probably. I mean, well, they're already saying no, but they're already kind of saying that in this when they're talking about Google. So in the book,
it knows more about you than you know. Yes.
Right, because I mean, it's like, what can you remember what you searched a year and 3 days ago? You know, it's like
right. I mean, I have a broader philosophical argument against the whole thing, but yes.
No. Well, yeah.
I mean, what does it mean to be you and know you? So yes. You can't remember. Yeah, I don't remember what I ate for dinner 7 days ago. Obviously, a computer would be great at doing that, for sure.
Yes.
But
yes.
What does that have to do with me?
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, and you're right, because you're not as much of a behavioralist as I am. But I think your actions do speak louder than your words often.
I agree with that. I mean, I agree.
Well, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about interpreting somebody.
Right, but a computer's not interpreting anything.
We're talking about a human interpreting somebody that they're
right.
I
think that your actions are a good example of who you are, but the computer doesn't do, like, if you ate steak 7 days ago and you ate mashed potatoes 8 days ago.
Yes. It's not. Sorry, I don't mean to be flippant. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Anyway, it's okay. We could just be like, I could be wrong about the whole thing. I'm just going off feel on this.
No. It's more of like, I agree that the computer isn't interpreting things, but the human is interpreting the computer.
Yes, for sure.
That's the point. The computer is still a tool. I agree with that. It's not a sentient being.
Right.
But it is. I mean, it's just. I guess I don't understand why I have to explain this. It is creating things in a way that the human is able to read. Right? You can track and get a statistic about like the rate that somebody is clicking on a website and stuff, and then a human can see that, a computer can compute that number. It can track it, compute it, and store it, and then a human can come and look at it.
Yes. So
I wasn't ever saying that the computer was interpreting.
Right.
I just maybe that's it. Yeah.
Right. I believe you.
Sorry.
It's okay. Here, you can have a computer. You can have an economic model that a computer does, and it calculates it beautifully. And it spits out these numbers, and those numbers can be absolute garbage. That was my point.
I agree.
You can create all sorts of computers can do crazy things, but those things are not always worthwhile.
Yeah, no, but I mean, this is where it's just I mean, I'm working on a program right now. I have a cross correlation image basically. So I have like a bunch of points, and I have a bunch of angles for each point. And I'm trying to draw lines from this, basically, because I used a template. It's a template matching problem, basically. I have a template that's basically a filament, and you put it in the image, and you're trying to find all the filaments in the image, essentially. And so I have a ground truth. You know, I make a synthetic tomogram. I put in the template, and I add noise. I try to make it as real, but that's my ground truth. I know where the thing is. So you just do that on a larger scale for whatever your problem is.
Right.
That's how you implement a model well. Obviously, there's always uncertainty in models, but you can minimize it a great degree. And I think maybe the only way to see that is in practice. But this isn't as, I think, I mean, it's not that it's an easy problem, but ultimately, just to bring back to the point and to remind people why we're talking about this, I was saying this because I'm just saying that these are things that are working in opposition to the encrypt first method, and that are helping the people that believe decryption is sort of inevitable. So why even try?
Right.
And so the memory, but I think that is still a good point, is that there is a interpret the data problem too. That is not trivial. So I agree completely with that. It's not trivial, but it's not insurmountable, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
And I think they're doing a good job already, because we're catching all these terrorists that are like Googling, how do I make a bomb?
Right.
Then the FBI shows up. It's
maybe. I think we're
excuse me.
I think we're catching a lot of things. I think it's like a tuna net.
Yes. Well, certainly. I mean, have you heard? Yeah, definitely. I was going to bring up an example, but I'm realizing it doesn't exactly apply.
It's fine, and it'll maybe get better. I mean, especially with something like crime and terrorism, it's this problem. Like that old movie Minority Report.
Yeah, great movie.
Right, but how do you solve that problem of, if the claim is that it is accurately catching criminals, what's the problem?
Yes, and the problem is that it is terrorizing non-criminals.
I mean, that's not even just the problem. I would say the deep problem is, how can you prove your statement?
Right. Well, yes.
And the problem is the way to prove it is like the long way by hand, ultimately. Which means that now you've like doubled the work.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, and this is what brings people, I think, ultimately to the not wanting to have the death penalty, because it's this is essentially the argument, I think, that it's better to not convict an innocent or not kill an innocent person than let 10 killers free. So there's another point that I thought was important and it was worth bringing up, and it has to do with the Stored Communications Act, which it was a Reagan era law that was placed, 1986. It addresses voluntary and compelled disclosure of stored wire and electronic communications and transactional records held by, and here's the important point, third parties, internet service providers, or really more just third-party providers.
Probably it wasn't really addressing internet service providers at the time.
I mean, the Wikipedia, synopsis said internet service providers. It was,
what would an internet service provider have been in the 80s?
AT&T, somebody that's actually carrying the network.
Right.
But or Bell Labs, whatever it was called back then. Or Bell Labs was just a component. It doesn't matter. Ma Bell.
Right.
It was called that at some point. So I bring that up because this was basically what allowed the government to subpoena and get a bunch of information on WikiLeaks from Google and Twitter and Facebook, and really just any third party that was holding data about WikiLeaks. And this is getting at the Fourth Amendment, where it's basically the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply in this case because the reasoning is you've already given up your privacy by allowing a third party to see it.
Right.
Which is why when we opened the episode, I was saying, well, then it seems to me what needs to happen is you need to one needs to come up with a technology to communicate without a third party.
I mean, that is the peer-to-peer idea, right? Without a third party. I mean, that's exactly what they were writing about in the Bitcoin white paper.
But they still have third party verifiers. It's a third party verifier still.
Well,
because that's the question. Is yes, of course, you're right.
Well, so it claims it eliminates third party verification.
Yes, but you're verifying with the network essentially, which is the third party. There is still a third party. That's my point.
Right.
Somebody is still, the network is signing off on the transaction. And maybe that is necessary, right? Maybe
Well,
the
for
third
a
party
digital
isn't-
transaction, probably.
Yes. Yes. But I guess I'd want to think about that point more. And that's why I'm bringing it up. And also, I wanted to just bring it up more generally about this point of third-party storage. I mean, this is really what gets everybody in trouble.
Right.
Is this law, and then I think this is kind of how the Espionage Act was able to be.
I mean, it's good. It's good for people to know because it means that every email you send, every text message, every phone call, every Zoom call, everything that you do through technology.
Yes, you have already given up.
I mean,
implicitly.
actually, even every letter you send.
Yeah,
Yeah, because you're using the technology of the Postal Service.
Right. And so, but they brought up a point that this doesn't have to be the de facto way of that things are done. And I think it brought up Norway during World War II as they encrypted all the telephone.
Right. Yeah. This is the war effort.
Just everything having to do that was going over the telephone. They encrypted it all because of not wanting to have it be intercepted, I think, by the Germans and stuff. So, yeah, it brings up philosophical questions. And it's also, all of this is more of to say, it's always worth questioning the status quo, right? I mean, is this how we want our government to be still operating? This was, over 30 years ago that it was enacted, and the world is a very different place. You say that we're losing, and I think I understand where that sentiment comes from when you say, and I'm getting back to the idea of basically the cypherpunk encryption movement. But I think in many ways the pendulum is swinging because of when you look at, like you were saying, how more people, who would have been the Joe Rogan in the 1980s.
I think I said ivermectin.
You said ivermectin.
I think I said who would have known about ivermectin if COVID had happened in the 1990s. You're
right. That's what you said.
Let's not water it down.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And that's the point, though, is that, and you could honestly make that same point about 14 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
So something has changed, and it does make me question why, because the way that I learn about all these things are on YouTube, which is owned by Google. And it's like, I understand that Google is in some ways programming me because it's offering me an algorithm that they say is autonomous, but how do I know that, or rather they say it is reacting to things I watch, but they could be tuning it for all I know. It's offering me things.
It seems likely that they are.
Yes. I don't understand. I don't even remember how I discovered like Rogan and Howard Stern, Norm Macdonald. It's like at just some point they all came across my feed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And
the CEO of Minds, which is like an open source Twitter alternative, went on Thaddeus Russell's podcast years ago. This was back when I was still in California. It was probably like 2019. I think it might have even been pre-pandemic, maybe not. I don't remember. Anyway, but Thaddeus Russell was asking him, how do we know that Minds isn't just the same as all these other social media platforms with these crazy algorithms that, build these like insane, what was everybody talking about at the time? Echo chambers. That was the word everybody was using at the time. And he said, his answer was simple. He said, the source code is available. So if you want, you can just take the time and look through it, and you can see exactly how it works. And Thaddeus Russell said, like, that's about as good of an answer as you can give, because obviously most people can't understand the code, and that's a hurdle. But you are being basically as transparent as possible, because you're saying, like, I have the schematic. This is literally how it works. So look for yourself.
And I mean, the same thing could be said about all the cryptocurrencies. They're all on GitHub.
Exactly. And which is where, to me, this is where I was when I was talking about not liking the the secret nature of it, and then I was kind of cutting. I was sort of going back on myself last week. I think I'm wrong about it because I think I was wrong about it. I think that they are transparent where they need to be, where it's actually important, and then they're encrypting where they need to be, where it's important.
Right.
And there's even a point, I don't remember who said it, I have it highlighted somewhere, where one of them talks about software needing to be open source. Mm-hmm. And that being...
Yeah.
Well, they're talking about in the cipher built-in control to prevent people from understanding it and modifying it. And then Jeremy says, yes, so it can contain the function to monitor the user and its data. So they're talking about things like GPS or smartphones or MP3 players that have a function that the user sees, but actually there's a built-in separate function that has to do with surveillance.
Right.
And then so Jeremy says this is the importance of free software in a free society. And to me, the implication under that is that the free software in the free society is something that anybody can make and anybody could see how it works.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, it is an interesting aspect of their transparency. And I think it gets to this idea too of like there's this assumption that going back to the why would you want to hide something from the government? It's like, well, because the government has the capacity to be tyrannical. So you should have privacy from the government. And the founding fathers understood this, which is why they designed it this way.
Right. I mean, the government will like ruin your life.
That it will.
I was listening to what's his name? John Gillespie?
Gilmore.
Yeah. John Gilmore. He had this talk where he was talking about travel IDs. And he did this whole sort of set of experiments and then lawsuits with the government because he was talking about how you didn't even need an ID to get on an airplane until the late 90s. And that was a law that was sort of created out of a sham. He was talking about how there was a plane crash in New York, and it was assumed to be terrorism. And so the government just hopped on this, now we need to do this ID thing. And then it was found out not to be terrorism. But the rule didn't change.
Well, yeah, and now we're all being X-rayed every time we fly on a plane.
Right.
It's like, so we're all being irradiated.
Right. But he was talking about how I'm trying to remember why I brought this up. I had a point, so I'll talk it through and see if I can find it. He was talking about how actually there was never a real rule that you, from a federal perspective, had to show your ID. And it was this thing that kind of came into the system because there was a rule that airlines had to ask you for your ID, but you were within your rights to opt out, to refuse, which is interesting because this is currently the thing with biometrics. Anybody, I don't know if most people know this, I think, but if you go to the airport and they have those biometric scanners, you can opt out. And I always do. And they don't, no problem. Okay, no problem. So you don't have to do that to anybody listening.
Wait, which biometric scanners are you talking about?
So when you get on an airplane now at many airports, when you go through TSA, you used to have to show your ID and your boarding pass. You no longer have to show your boarding pass. Some airports still make you do that. That's airport dependent, but you no longer you no longer have to. So like in Austin, all you have to do is show your ID. They have a system where they're also doing a face scan.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, to compare it to your ID, so they get 2 points of data. Now I remember the Gillespie thing, but you can opt out. You are well within your rights to opt out of the face scan.
Yeah, and you mean Gilmore?
Yes, Gilmore. Yeah, yes, John Gilmore.
Were you just listening to like Gillespie?
I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, John Gilmore. What he was saying is that so he ended up getting. He tried all these things. He couldn't get on air. But this was after 9/11. There. He was saying that there is no federal law mandating that you show your ID, and it was this thing where he'd butt up to it, and he'd like get through TSA, he'd get through security, because yes, that's true. And then like they wouldn't let him on the plane, and it was like some arbitrary wall that he would hit every time.
That's funny.
And so he got to the point where he was trying to get on this flight, and they wouldn't give him a ticket. And they said, "Okay, yes, you can go through. You can get on the airplane, but you have to go through an extensive strip search."
Jesus.
And so then he was saying that his legal team said, and he's like, this is a good rule for everybody: never consent to a search from the government under any circumstances ever. If they will search you, they will search you, but never give them permission to. Because then, like he said, the law changes as soon as you've consented to it. Because now they're allowed to take things that they wouldn't have been allowed to take before, and use things as evidence that they wouldn't have been allowed to before, because it's a consensual search.
Just like don't let them into your home.
Don't let them into your home. Don't agree to let them search your car or search you. If they're going to, they will.
And this, of course, is not legal advice.
Well, this was his team's legal advice to him.
This is, but do your own research.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just, plausible deniability.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's
why I brought
very
that
interesting.
Up,
Also funny, I'm just imagining, because, this is kind of the benefit to being like, one common thing with all these three cypherpunk founders is I think they all made a bunch of money in the 80s, and then they just retired. Yep. So I'm just imagining a retired dude just like, I have all the time in the world for this.
Kinda, yeah. He was just trying to get a flight from Baltimore to San Francisco. Like, can I do it?
I'm glad that there are people who have the time and will spend time doing that sort of thing, because it's true. It's like there are aspects of the system that need to be pushed up against that. It's many of us just don't have. Well, and because many of us don't have time to do these protests.
Right. Well,
it's like you see the protests outside in the street and stuff, but there's so many other ways of protesting if you have the means.
I know. This is the problem I had all last week.
Yes, exactly. It is true.
But so he ended up losing because he tried to sue, and there's this tricky thing, and this is a big problem, not just with this rule, but lots of rules. We've talked about this before. Is it isn't a law. Congress never made a law. It's a ruling through the Department of Homeland Security, and before that through the FAA or something. It's like a code or a statute, and so it cannot be brought before the Supreme Court no matter what. It can only go through an appellate court, which is not
the executive
right. So which will not make factual rulings, will only make sort of case by case contingent rulings.
Right. So we have right here an example of exactly what Locke said the constitutional government should not have, is a executive that it's unregulated by, or that's regulating itself.
So these are the problems. And then what do you think? What is your answer to the question? Do you think that the cypherpunks are right in that this is the way to should we exit, and is this the way?
Well, what do you mean by exit?
Say to hell with the Fed and their dollars. Say, to hell with the government and their income tax. I will trade freely with people as I wish without government interference. I will communicate freely. I'll send emails through my own system. I'll send letters through my own system.
Yeah, I'm all for that, regardless of just getting rid of the government, kind of. I think that...
I'm saying, circumvent the entire thing.
Yeah. I think that the government serves some purposes. I take the Milton Friedman,
right.
Whatever you want to call it, limp wrist approach. So I'm not ready to throw the whole baby out, but
I'm going to keep the bathwater myself.
You'll keep the bathwater. I'll keep the baby. But I do think that there's just things about my life that the government doesn't need anything to do with. and it's my right as a being to do that. And
Right.
and yeah, which is why I do think that we should be pushing on these fronts. One should be pushing on these fronts.
Mm-hmm. What? Yeah, right. Okay. So in this book they go through fighting the surveillance state with the laws of man, and then with physics and things like that. And so, curious about your take on that. Moving forward, we should be fighting on these fronts or pushing back. To me, fighting with the laws of man is sort of the direct way of pushing back. You know, bringing lawsuits against the government, legal battles, and then with the physics, it's not even fighting or pushing back. It's just exiting the system.
Yes.
Which is they're both risky, actually. They're both very risky things to do. Mm-hmm. Because fighting with the laws of man brings the spotlight on you as potentially a criminal with respect to the law. And fighting with physics makes you a criminal, and if you're found out, you'll be in big trouble.
But not necessarily, because that's the thing. I agree, like, there are things that you can do that, experimental things you can do that will get you in trouble with the law. But if you come up with a completely new technology that people aren't prepared for, it's like, they're not going to be able to regulate what they don't know.
Right. But there are those weird, I think it alludes to it in the books, there are fairly strict legal codes about encryption and cryptography in general, and what types of things you are and are not allowed to encrypt. And encrypting things you're not supposed to encrypt are very serious felonies.
True. But that's why I think reading these laws in the fine print is important, because it might be that a lot of these, and we should read them. Maybe we should have an expert crypto lawyer on.
Nice. Yeah, that would be great.
But I'm sure that there are loopholes in all of these where there's some clause that's like, on on an internet service provider. It's like, well, if you're not using the internet, then,
Right.
It's like, what is the internet then? Mm-hmm. And then you get into that definition. It's like, well, not technically, using the internet protocol here, right? Something like that. Mm-hmm. But yes, anyway. But of course, we're not, because that's the thing. I'm not talking about breaking any laws here. I want that to be very clear, Antushka.
Right.
These laws do not exist, is my point.
Some of them do, though.
Yeah.
It's what we talked about, the implications of it. The implication of a cryptocurrency is not that you should have to pay any asset or income or capital gains or any tax on it. Mm-hmm. And to me, this is the implication of this book, is the fight is actually to not pay taxes, to refuse. That's the fight.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a lost game. You've lost from the start, because the entire purpose of the project is moot.
Well, I'm going to start calling you Wesley Snipes.
Yeah, right.
Cool. Yeah. Well, overall, it seems you said you liked the reading.
Yeah. Should we finish it for next time, or almost finish it?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we basically read half of it, right?
We didn't read the physics one, which is probably interesting.
Yeah, I'm down to keep reading it.
Yeah,
we don't, unless there's something else you want to read.
No, I think it's fine. Rats in the Opera House is a fun title.
Yeah, I'll probably just start with the physics one, fighting total surveillance with the laws of physics, and just see how far I get.
Yeah.
I can read the rats in the Opera House.
Sure.
One, I'll make sure I do that. Censorship.
Yeah. I still don't have Ben's book, by the way. I have contacted Amazon's customer service, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I guess it never got sent. You'll get it soon." Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. But
yeah. Because that's basically, just for the listeners, we're intending to have the Recluse Muse back on and read one of Ben's books. Yep. But we're having trouble getting it. I have mine, actually. Nice. I had no problems. Let me just say
well, that's good. Yeah. Amazon likes you more than it likes me, I guess.
Yeah, it's the old Houston-Austin competition.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you going to bleep out both of those places?
I'm tired now. maybe a year ago I would have, but now 2x the episode. Make sure we didn't say anything stupid, and then
we said plenty of stupid stuff.
We said overly stupid.
Yeah, okay.
I should say.
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. We did it. See you, folks.
See ya.